Hey everyone, and welcome back to another pass at Another Pass podcast. I'm Casey Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And today we are doing what we always do on these episodes, which are bonus episodes of the main show, where we navel gaze at the old episodes from early in the run before Sam was part of this show, and in many cases are no longer available on podcast players that have limits on how far back they go. So today we're looking at another classic episode. We're looking at the 15th episode of the show, and I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with the episode that we're talking about today.
This is a good episode. There's good sound quality all the way through. Are you all in the same room?
We are. And that does lead to a few things. So let's say actually what the name of the movie
yes, I'm sorry. We're bearing the lead. I apologize to the listener.
So today we're talking about Avengers Age of Ultron. And I think that the listener will kind of understand what kind of episode it's going to be, because it's a movie that kind of just screams mid, but like you can't put your finger on why.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really good episode where we really get into it all, because we're coming at it, and actually it's a Ben and Addy episode, because this is an early one in the show. So we're still doing a lot of the stuff in the CPOV studios that Addy had in his basement back when he and J Mike lived together. So we're all in the room together. It's a lively discussion. We're very positive about it, but also this is coming out after Civil War, but before any of like Infinity War or Endgame or anything like that comes along. So this is an interesting point in that conversation. But, you know, as we like to point out, audio quality is pretty good overall. There's a little bit where you can tell people are away from the mic because they're, we're animated and so forth. I noticed that for me a bunch, and I'm going to see what I can do in post to sort of like clean that up a little bit. But overall, audio quality is pretty good.
Yeah, especially compared to some of the older episodes.
Yeah. And it's, I think, a lively discussion. I think we make some really good points. I think the big thing going into it is that we have a lot of really good analysis of the movie itself. And I think that we have interesting ideas about improvements. And I think this is an interesting episode because Age of Ultron is a movie that is just not as much of a standout as the first Avengers movie or as the 1-2 punch of Infinity War and Endgame, so it has to stand on its own, being kind of this like middle movie in this very big sea of movies that are out there. And I think we get at a lot of the points that were problems in this episode. And so I think listeners should check it out. I think we have some really good takes on that one. But it is definitely a movie that requires the right perspective to truly appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Sam, before we get into the episode, anything that you wanted to bring up about this movie or about the episode in question?
I just want everyone to know that Case will use his infinite knowledge of the Marvel universe, not just cinematic, just the entire in this episode, and it will be fun for you. There will be some shout outs to characters that if you are not familiar with in the Marvel universe, Case will definitely talk about it. And it made me have the warm feels because that is the Case I know and love.
Oh, this is a peak issues. Case episode.
Yeah, this is such a Case episode. So I actually want to bring attention to that, and I just want to be like, if you've ever really wondered, I mean, like maybe our podcast is enough, but if you've ever wondered what it's like to just like hang out with Case, this episode is just hanging out with Case.
Yeah, I mean, we're really like excited about this movie. I have a lot of notes. I went
so
hard
many notes
on this movie,
but it's great. It's great. You are 2 steps away from like rewriting and also defending this film at the same time at any given moment, and it is honestly possibly my favorite Case episode. And sorry, Ben and Addy. To me, this is a Case episode. It is Case heavy. And I just think that it's very enjoyable for me.
Yeah. So why don't we get into the actual episode, and then we'll have our more detailed breakdown on the backside. But yeah, so here is the episode of Another Pass on Avengers Age of Ultron.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Hey, Nerferders, thanks for tuning in. I'm Case Aiken, and today I'm joined by Ben and Addy.
Hey!
I know, who could have expected that?
I know.
So thanks for tuning in to another past podcast where we talk about movies that could be good, could be bad, but definitely could be great. And today we're talking about one that is definitely, or at least in my opinion, in the good camp. We're talking about Avengers 2, Age of Ultron.
Yeah. This is one that a lot of people like, I don't know. It feels like some people tend to put this in a bad category sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think they put it in the bad category for all of the reasons that I have for why it's not great. Like, I love the Marvel movies. It's hard for them to be a true miss, but there are definitely a lot of movies that are kind of forgettable. And this one's not truly forgettable because it's an Avengers movie, so it's a big pull out all the stops kind of movie. But it definitely doesn't hit some of the notes that other movies in the series have done. The big comparison is Captain America: Civil War, which it was the immediate follow-up big Marvel movie and is a big Avengers movie in a lot of ways. And compare it with the first Avengers, where it felt like a victory lap for everything that they'd been trying to achieve at that point. Age of Ultron is a good movie. The scenes are really good. The action's really good. The characterization's nice, but ultimately the consequences and the stakes are pretty low. And that, I think, makes it feel less worthwhile of a movie. Like, you could skip it and just be a little confused about who Vision and Scarlet Witch are in Civil War. And where it is, it could be better. That's the point. It could be better.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend this movie. I like this movie. I disagree with you. This is a really hard episode for me to do because I disagree with your, like, I think the stakes are high. I think there are consequences that come out of this movie that roll into phase 3. And I thought it was set up very well through the rest of the other phase 2 movies that honestly don't give it a lot of wiggle. Like, there's not a lot for me to tweak and change in this movie because it's so good. Like, I have a really hard time coming up with things I don't like about this movie.
Well, I can tell you one thing I was like, just on the surface, one thing I was sort of disappointed with, and it's kind of twofold really, but it's not like, I don't think Ultron was bad. I actually really like him. I like James Spader playing him. I think he's got the right voice. I like even his emotion, like him being born out of fear. I like the connection with the Mind Stone and Loki's staff. I thought that was a nice, like, narrative through line, and thematically it really worked for me, at least, with Vision and him being sort of like the opposites of two attempts at a particular attempt by Tony Stark. See, you mentioned before the podcast that there's an arc for Tony Stark through, like, Iron Man 3, Age of Ultron, and Civil War that you think is not realized. I actually think is realized. Well, now, see, this is partially because I love Iron Man 3. I've always loved Iron Man 3. It has been one of my favorites in the that is right up there with Guardians of the Galaxy for me. Guardians of the Galaxy is my absolute favorite, but I adore Iron Man 3. And maybe that's because I'm a huge Shane Black fan, but I like what it did as far as building on Tony's story left over from Avengers. It was a nice way to develop that character further. And my thought process is, you take Tony out of after Iron Man 3, he wants to find an end to what they do. And he says that he wants to find an end to their mission, and as opposed to having to continue the fight like Cap is. And it was funny, I was watching some of the deleted scenes today, and there was a little bit more of, like, Cap always wanting to be in the fight as opposed to just wanting to end the mission. And it, like, there was a little bit more narrative things that were narratively interesting, like things that I didn't appreciate the first time around. Like, there was a version of Thor's bat scene that was actually good, because that was one scene.
That's the scene, yeah.
That was one scene
yeah.
Because that scene just was kind of an attempt to connect it to the bigger universe, to include the Infinity Stones, to give it a rationale. But he gave, like, there's a deleted scene where he's talking, like, he's possessed by one of the Norn spirits and lashing out and explaining the sacrifice that's going to need to be made, and, like, what the role of the Mind Stone, and kind of prophesying Vision's birth, basically.
Okay.
So there are a lot of things that I think are interesting there. I actually think this movie needs an extra half hour, to be perfectly honest.
That's a fair assessment. I mean, I will admit, I have not seen the deleted scenes for this movie. The version that I own just didn't have it, and I have not had a chance to go out and get like a version that has it. I think that sort of supports the thesis, though, that the movie is not there, but it could be.
Right.
And I like this movie. I don't want that to come off as being not the case, but it's not the strong. Like, compare this with Avengers 1. I think this is a weaker movie between the two. I think Avengers 1 is, while it's not very complex and this tries to be complex, I think this movie rushes through a lot of things, partially because it cuts out scenes clearly that would have made it, or that would have unified some of the concepts.
Yeah.
I also think that this movie could have been Iron Man 3. I think that the other characters, aside from it being a continuation of Captain America's story from Winter Soldier, I think a lot of the other characters don't have quite as much of a role that couldn't have just as easily been in someone else's movie. Like, compare the story arcs that we get for the people in this movie with the ones that we get in Civil War. Like, Civil War goes fairly deep in some characters' psyches. I would argue as deep into Thor in this movie as it does into, say, Scarlet Witch or Vision in Civil War.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really go into it being like, oh, well, look at what the next movie does. But the next movie shows that you can do a Marvel movie that's about one character, but still really spend a lot of time with other characters.
Right, because there is time spent on those other characters. But one place I do agree with you is you mentioned, I don't think there's a lack of stakes in this story. I do think there's a lack of consequence. One thing that I would have liked to add to Stark's arc through these movies, because I like the idea of him wanting an end to the mission, then regretting his mistakes with Ultron, which is why he takes the stance that he does in Civil War. That's so, because I've always kind of seen that as the arc. And of course, with Cap, you see his loss of trust in the government and in the institution he once believed in. So that's why he was on the side that he was by the time we get to Civil War. With Tony, I would have actually really enjoyed if at the end of this movie, they decided to, in a way, it's actually kind of the end of Iron Man 2, but to basically kick him off the team, but keep him on as a consultant so he continues to develop certain gadgets and stuff like to enhance. Like, I would have liked.
He's basically the bankroll for the Avengers.
Right. That he's still a valued member, but he can't be in the fight with them anymore. Because the thing is, like, I would have liked him to even call out the team on, like, their gadgets that clearly the team has been given gadgets that he's developed for them. And this is something that he does. They know that this is who he is. So is it really any different from Cap using his little special magnetic,
get the shield back.
Yeah. And everything like that, the whatever other enhancements he's offered everyone.
Right.
Right. And he does make a joke about it earlier on where it's like, no, he's the leader. I'm just the one who
pays for everything.
Yeah. It would have been nice to have a little bit more of a conflict, continue the conflict, to really intensify the conflict between him and Steve Rogers, I think.
Without it being Civil War?
Or have this
to really
be Civil
build
War.
to build towards Civil War, towards that culmination.
Yeah, here's my thought. And so consequences is a better word. Because, sure, stakes. The world might end. It's hard to really top those stakes specifically.
Yeah.
But the consequences are not really there because the team isn't shattered at the end, nor is it actually made far stronger at the end. And I kind of would like the team to shift in a way. The movie has this really great opening scene where it's like we got the gang back together. Look how well they work together. Like, you get that great shot of all of them in one frame moving and acting.
Right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the movie, the team is not worse or better. It's just different. And that, I think, is actually a weakness of this movie. I like, they end with Vision, Scarlet Witch. These are the powerhouses. You get Falcon and War Machine. So you've got tech and skill. So you're not looking at a team that's devoid
dramatically
of
different,
yeah,
right?
It's a different set of powers. But the Vision has the Mind Stone. We've already established it's one of the most dangerous things ever. It might be more powerful than Thor's hammer.
Right.
So we're not talking about a big drop in power.
Yeah.
What would have been kind of interesting, because they keep doing references in this movie to it, is Captain America's Kooky Quartet, where it was him, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye, where it was like, if that was the last team left, like if everyone else was out. Maybe not Hawkeye, because Renner was trying to be more prominent, but also not as big a deal. I don't know. Renner doesn't know what he wants to do with his franchise, it seems.
Right, yeah.
Well, Yeah,
and I don't think
Falcon.
they know what they want to do with him either.
but I thought he was used well in this movie.
In this movie,
Yeah.
he was. And also in Civil War, I think him kind of popping in, like you actually could believe because of the background drama with the actor that like, oh, Jeremy Renner's not in this movie. And then he shows up.
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't disliked his appearances in these movies. Like
Yeah.
those have been good. The only time I wish he was in Winter Soldier.
Yeah,
because-
It would have made
sense.
more sense for
Yeah,
him to
because
be
then
in
it could have
Winter
been like that ground level like Wetworks team, and he definitely should have been on that team.
Right.
Yeah.
But aside from him being missing from that scene, he's been a consistently good part of the Marvel universe. Like they set him up in Thor.
Right.
It wasn't a huge setup, but everyone got excited because it's like he's got the bow.
Yeah.
And then he's around. But yeah, like in the movie with them in a worse place because Thor has to leave, Iron Man is kicked off the team or has a like a difference of opinion. They're not at blows, but a difference of opinion from Cap. Like it's like, well, fine, I'm gonna go off and do things with this, like charity for Stark and stuff like that. Set them up for Civil War. Have other members be like, I don't know if I can do this, and then it's just Cap and then like the two metahumans that he just picked up. And a reformed assassin. And it could be Black Widow instead. It could be Falcon instead.
Yeah.
Any of these can kind of play their role, but it should be a human everyman to counter the two like nascent metahumans.
superpowers. Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that Quicksilver dies in this movie is actually part of what I'm saying in terms of stakes and consequences. He probably should have lived. And I know they killed him because he's a complicated legal character with the X-Men franchise. But his death means nothing in this movie. Like it in the narrative of the movie it does, but in the broader Marvel universe it means nothing because it's not a huge tipping point for Scarlet Witch for later stuff. At least we haven't seen it yet,
Right.
And we saw a lot of her in Civil War, so you can't say, "Oh, we just didn't get it."
Right.
And he's not a big enough character in the comics, nor is he well established enough that his death has
Means
like
anything.
shockwaves in the Marvel U. If Iron Man died and Tony Stark was just dead, that
Right.
would have been a huge shockwave. And I don't want that specifically, but
Who would you have killed? Because I've thought about that a lot. Like, because that's one thing going into this, like into my rewatch for this episode. I was like, yeah, the Quicksilver death just seems very like ultimately meaningless. Again, for like you said, for the stakes of this movie, it's kind of fine within the movie, but. I kept on trying to think, like, who would you have killed? Would you have still killed? Would you have actually killed Hawkeye?
Well, that
But
begs like the question the one thing that I would not have used
Quicksilver. Well, you wouldn't have used Quicksilver or Scarlet Witch.
I might have used Scarlet Witch because I wouldn't have used Quicksilver. Period. Just because he was already being used by Fox. It did there was no reason to use him. I know that they had already established that with the end credit scene, but as Addy pointed out to me earlier today, that was filmed by Whedon. So they knew they were that you could have used a different character. I don't think you needed Quicksilver for that role. And I think there's plenty of other characters that you could use.
See, I would have rather had him as he was and died as ultimately meaninglessly as that than completely cut him. Because I really liked the way they used him and the way that they then referenced the history of the Avengers by having him be around and having Scarlet Witch be around. That felt very reminiscent to that first big roster shift in the Avengers lore. And that was exciting to me. The fact that we don't actually get that as the team at the end of the movie would only be a big shift because that's such a power change. But getting the nods where it's like, okay, we got Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and Hawkeye and Cap all kind of running around, and it feels like the second wave of the Avengers.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I've got some thoughts when we get into Ultron and on some of that might have had some shift there, but I don't know who I would kill. Because Thor, you can't exactly kill. You could actually, well, I guess you could, but then we just know he'd be coming back.
Yeah.
You can't kill Cap.
Widow.
Actually,
it
would have been good.
Yeah,
it would have been really interesting.
Because I was actually just thinking while you're talking about that there isn't a real roster shift. If you would let's say we had said Stark gets kicked off the team, Thor obviously goes back, goes off.
I think you do get a huge roster. So yeah, you lose Thor, you lose Hulk, you lose Hawkeye,
right?
You lose Stark.
So those are 4 people from the original team that are gone.
Oh,
but then you add
a change in the team. I do agree on that. I'm saying in the scale of the team.
But there's never, is there ever
War
really
Machine
a huge
is not Iron Man. That's true.
Is there ever a huge scale shift?
Yes, the initial roster change going from the original Avengers, which was Iron Man, Thor, Giant Man, Wasp, Hulk, who left pretty quickly, but then switched over to essentially Captain America, and Hulk switched off.
Right.
And then you go to Cap, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye. And at the time, Hawkeye, up until joining the Avengers, was a supervillain.
Right.
And just a human supervillain at that. You go to
I
down
get, yeah,
in-
you do
in
go
number
down.
and also power. Like Scarlet Witch, at no point at that time had been set up. To
But
be
I don't
as
think
powerful.
this Scarlet Witch is anywhere near as powerful as, you know, the
She's not
Scarlet
the-
Witch of.
Yeah, she's
She's
not.
She's
the
not
re-
as
the
powerful
comics.
as the Age of M. I can do anything, Scarlet Witch.
Right.
But she is very powerful. She's powerful enough to justify her position in a higher tier Avengers group. Like she's powerful enough to justify her in Civil War being cocky about her powers. She's not the '60s era Scarlet Witch who every now and then, that water main broke. Like
Right.
that. Like
Yeah.
Right.
The chaos
the
magic.
power scale on
Yeah.
this character has gone a lot from the 60s.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. Back then, it was really just Quicksilver and Cap, and then like every now and then Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch contributed.
Yeah.
Like, which let's talk about a few things that I like that I don't want to lose.
Okay.
Before we get into
Sure.
my bigger pitch, I like Quicksilver a lot in this movie. I hate his look. I bitched about his look online. I think he doesn't look like the character enough.
He looks like a Skechers ad.
Yeah, exactly. Like it looks like a makeshift version, which frustrates me because the one that we got over in the X-Men movies also doesn't look like the character, and I'm like, I just want one guy with like the slick back hair and like not a shitty costume. Okay, but you know what I really loved about him? So they introduce him as a villain. He's impossibly powerful as a villain,
Yeah.
but then the way they justify it for him being vulnerable and actually not like OP as a hero is that he gets overtaxed being a hero because doing the right thing is harder than just taking out a person. Like him having to run through a train and save lives. That moment is the first time he's winded, and from that point on, you understand that he is vulnerable when he's actually being pushed to his limits. If you just catch him fresh, you can't beat him. But if he is trying his best to do the right thing, that's when you could actually shoot him, and that's how he gets shot at the end. Like he's already breathing hard throughout every time he moves, and like they do such a great job of having this character who has a superpower that is such a problem because it should just be instant win, and they explain very concisely why. Yes, if it's a bad guy, it's really hard to win or to beat that. But the second he's trying to do the right thing, it is difficult because it's too much for him.
That's an interesting perspective because that's not something I really like. Now that you mention how winded he was during the fight in Sokovia, that's a greater appreciation now that I have for their version.
I like that.
Yeah,
of Quicksilver.
I love that. I don't think it's obvious enough
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the audience because
Yeah.
I saw that the first time because the first time he's breathing hard after using his super speed is when he clears the people off the train, and that is the shift in his personality type. That was great. I thought I was like, oh, this is a perfect rendition, and this is what I go to a Joss Whedon movie to see, like
Right.
subtle takes and that are like comics accurate and also fun and like
Yeah.
good. I wish he was a little more of a dick, but I like that he was protective of his sister, that he had vendettas against people. These were all great.
Yeah.
It's hard to really get too mad about.
And they made him a little bit enough of a dick to Hawkeye.
Yes,
that
and
was
I like
fun.
that rapport.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was Hawkeye who also was part of the Kooky Quartet. Like that's a good relationship right there.
Right.
The Hulk Iron Man fight.
I totally love it.
It is, you know why I really love it? It is the first time that it happened. What?
You guys are doing great rewrites. Keep going.
Hey, we've already suggested quite a few rewrites, but
I said I'm listing the things I don't want changed.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The Hulk Iron Man fight. This
Yeah.
is the first time we get a full superhero fight in public
Yeah.
in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Up
and
until
and see the reaction and
Yes.
the fear, in
The
it.
scale.
The,
Yeah.
Avengers 1 had 2 scuffles, and they weren't very public. Like Thor and Hulk had a little bit of a fight on the helicarrier, but no, like the general populace didn't see that.
Right.
We
And then you have the fight in the woods.
well, the fight in the woods is like such a non-fight. In
Yeah.
there. This is the first time the public is really watching the Hulk be a monster in like that we see on screen because he doesn't in any of the other movie appearances.
Well, there's the college campus and the city fight with
Right,
Abomination.
where the military shows up and starts shooting shit with sonic waves, and where a different monster shows up and starts tearing up Harlem, and then he shows up and saves the day.
Right.
Like, we're talking, like, this is the first time the Hulk is an active destroyer of everything.
Yes.
And,
Okay.
And one of their heroes has to show up to save it.
Yeah.
And so that fight is great. It's cathartic. We've been wanting to see the Hulkbuster armor since forever, but especially since the trailers for Iron Man 3, where they had that armor that was basically the Hulkbuster armor, but not
Just
the
sitting in there,
Hulkbuster
yeah.
armor.
Mhm.
Not just sitting in there. It,
No,
it
the
shows
Igor.
up and it's like,
Oh, that's right, Igor. Yeah.
yeah, like that's what we all thought it was, and then it's like, oh, it's not the Hulkbuster armor.
It was worth
that-
the wait, though.
Yeah, and the
It
way
was.
it worked, where like it wasn't able to stand up to the Hulk.
Yeah,
and
then it
that
had to replace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was.
All of these were
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That fight was amazing.
And
Yeah.
you know what I also like is there's enough levity in the fight without taking away from the gravity of that fight and the consequences.
Yeah,
of that
Whedon
fight, too.
balances that really well.
Yeah.
He really does.
So the stuff with Wanda early on, where they shoot it like a horror movie, I really liked.
Yes.
Like the kind of the ring style, like
Jump
fast cutting,
cut,
like
yeah.
jump cuts. Yeah, those are all really good. She doesn't have like the same kind of nerf moment that happens with Quicksilver, or not as subtle a nerf moment. So all of a sudden she's just not quite as scary, and then you're like,
Well, she's
"Why?"
distracted.
Yeah, well,
you know,
that,
at the
sure.
end.
Oh, I
Sure,
thought
but-
she was great. That like when she finds the Ultron and rips its heart out.
Yeah.
After Quicksilver dies, like that was a great scene.
Yeah.
That
Oh, yeah,
was
she-
that was like really cool.
She's still powerful, but like Quicksilver goes from being this invincible like blur of destruction. Ultimately, he doesn't actually kill anyone, but he's so fast you can't really fight him. And then you get a justification for why he's not so good. Wanda, it's really just that. Oh, now that we're with her, we see that she's not really that good. Like. That kind of bugged me, but I loved her at the beginning. She seemed so scary. Like
Yeah.
the witch stuff was really good because we don't normally think about the witch thing as much.
Right.
Like if you really emphasize them being like gypsies and
Yeah,
like,
that's the
people being
only part
scared,
where
yeah.
they ever.
You're
Yeah.
like, okay, I get you being called a witch. Otherwise, it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, you're just you have a different superpower from the other superpower.
Right.
Like, oh, you can make things blow up and you don't without an obvious bolt. Versus
Yeah.
like, oh, well, but that one can fly and shoot.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Because I guess it's hard. Like I guess because her hex magic and chaos magic is a big part of her tool set. But that's, I guess, how do you represent that visually then?
Yeah, especially because when she came out in the comics, there weren't that many characters. Versus by the time that we get to the 90s and 2000s, there's a lot of characters out there.
Yeah.
Like, why are people more afraid of her than they are the Hulk or Thor or any? You know, it's the same problem I have with mutants, but even worse here because it's just like I don't think we're quite as superstitious or as accepting of superstition as like a 60s kind of era thing. Like.
I don't know.
I
If
don't know.
some chick came out and like, was able to just like, make wiggle her fingers and make people do crazy stuff and make you see weird stuff or blow stuff up with her mind, like I would be pretty freaked out.
Yeah, but they had to like emphasize that in this movie because otherwise, her blowing up something with her fingers versus like say Carol Danvers like going like that and like explosion coming from her hand. I don't see what the difference would be in the public's eyes. You know, like why is one scarier than the other? Why is one a witch and the other one is just like alien laser beams?
Oh, all right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, they would both be just as frightening, I suppose.
To a layperson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess.
So I thought they did a good job at the beginning. I wish they had done better transitioning it, like finding a happy medium where she still seems kind of supernatural and like a horror film kind of character. But I don't know how you would do that.
I mean, would you mirror her more with like what the Enchantress was in Suicide Squad?
Oh please.
God,
Shakira?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can just have belly dances, and that's how the world just is.
She makes a machine out of
Beam
belly
in the
dancing.
sky, like I'm gonna make a machine and blah.
magic machine.
A magic machine. Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
Again, I think this goes back to like when we were, you were like, let's do this movie. I was like, God, the only thing I can think of to do to fix the problems that I have with Quicksilver or with Scarlet Witch is to replace them. And I know like you like the idea of tying it back into, well, this is what, like that original, team up and how they came into the, the second Avengers or whatever. But like you said, like there's so many characters now to pull from them than what they had then.
Yeah.
I would have rather have seen an Ant-Man or somebody else, else come in those roles that they used those guys for.
Well, let me ask you this. So part of that is, Ant-Man they felt deserved his own movie before he joined the team.
Sure.
And Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, their origin is sort of intrinsic to being part of the Avengers. Is there another character you could think of that you would want to see done that way rather than getting their own movie and
I would have
sort of that villain
Ant-Man and Wasp
villain
would have
treat-
been awesome.
but getting sort of that villain treatment and turn.
Well,
to
Ant-Man
become-
actually, the Ant-Man they use in that movie,
Scott
would
Lang
fit.
is a kind
Scott
of
Lang,
villain,
that
yeah.
actually would fit. Because like the other thing to mention about that second roster of the Avengers is that it's all reformed villains plus Cap.
Right.
He was like the chaperone for a bunch of people who, up until that point, had all been villains. And so it's not just less powerful; it's also less obviously the heroes of the story. So Ant-Man would have actually fit well. Like he is another morally ambiguous character, as opposed to I can lift Thor's hammer Vision and I'm such a nice guy Falcon. Like
Right.
if it had been Ant-Man, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver, and then Black Widow, that would have been a morally ambiguous team. That then Cap is then the shepherd of,
yeah.
like the beacon of hope that they have to like rally around behind to like prove how good they can be.
I think though for this story, with just what they dealt with Ultron and sort of the trust issues that are on the team, I'm okay with them. Like, all right, well, you have your good guy Falcon and War Machine being added to the roster, and now you have Vision, which they are unsure of.
Yeah, I know, but
We aren't. We're like,
I mean,
oh, he's good. He's Jarvis.
well, here's why
They
he's-
warm up
exactly.
to him pretty quick.
It's
Yeah.
the Jarvis part that
Well-
makes him not feel as unsure.
They warm up to him pretty quick.
well, the moment but the thing is,
as soon as he picks up the hammer,
and that's what I
everybody's
was
like,
going to say,
yeah.
and that was
Okey-dokey.
that was an amazing part of that movie.
Yes,
the
agreed.
pick up the hammer
Agreed.
part is one of my
they
favorite
set
moments.
that up really well.
Yeah.
And making you think that it was just like a one-time gag,
Yeah.
but it had a payoff with Vision,
Right.
which was smart, really smart.
Yeah.
See-
because they gave us that scene at Comic-Con. And the internet went crazy for it. So we knew that scene was coming, and
Yeah.
you just didn't realize that it was actually going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So to have it pay again, this movie's so good.
Yeah.
This movie's
Well,
so good.
Another thing I love,
Yeah.
Tony's motives.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So
his
good.
rationale for everything he does is great.
Because I like
think
the
the
whole
timeline is
process of
screwy.
Shield around the world, like all
Yeah.
of those things are great.
I think the timeline is screwy. I think Iron Man 3 and the conclusion of Iron Man 3 betrays some of that. Now, I've said before, I felt that at the end of Iron Man 3 when he like takes his sunglasses off and is like, but really, I am Iron Man. Like his eyes should have flashed and he should have had the extremis in him.
Okay.
That would have been cool.
Like
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of Iron Man ever intentionally powering down. Like Tony Stark doesn't seem like that kind of person, like to abhor any kind of technology.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of him constantly pushing too far, and like his like him going too far is where he gets bitten in the ass.
Yeah.
So I think that Iron Man 3, they could have ended it that way, and then we jump forward, and now he's got extremis being everywhere, and that actually is the thing kind of pushing him. And now he's like, all right, well, but people are still dangerous. And I don't know if I can trust everyone. So how about we take what I've learned about the extremists and about artificial intelligence and combine them?
Merge it.
And that's how we get to Ultron.
And so yeah, kind of piggybacking on that, I would have loved to see the movie actually kind of open with a press conference of him introducing the Ultron initiative.
Yes.
Because I wanted to see Ultron as a good thing for a while. Turned
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
That's my big issue with
The
that's
turn
my
is
only
so
issue.
quick.
that is my big note actually here for
Yeah.
for
The
my
turn
pitch.
is very quick.
Yeah.
I see a couple ways you can do it, but I think that the ultimate answer that I have for this is have Ultron actually be a corrupted Jarvis, not just a totally new thing. And then once he sort of makes his physical form, and at first it's like, are you Jarvis? Like, I'm not Jarvis. And like have him shift his voice to the James Spader Ultron voice, but have it at first be a thing that it's Jarvis now being given a fleet of Iron Man armors that is now going to be his thing and that he's in control of, and that the things that they're doing to advance Jarvis and make him more powerful and use the mind gem to make him a more powerful computer. That's what then corrupts him, and then he becomes Ultron.
So you're using like the theme of power corrupts absolute power.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And then we get the question, which is that Vision isn't his son in that scenario. Vision is like they reset Jarvis and actually do like a proper job. Like instead of having him be a giant network, they trap him in one body, and that's the Vision body, and that's where we get his redemption. Like, so the Vision isn't just a child of Ultron done right. This is actually also a chance to redeem the ills of Ultron.
That's pretty much exactly my notes.
Okay, you too.
All right.
I mean, I have a few other versions if you want me to.
No, let's keep going.
Hold on, guys. So, okay, I'm going to take it back, and here's my actual idea. So my actual idea is that
How it should have really ended.
the Tesseract destroyed Red Skull, but his mind went up into space, and then it was caught by the Time Gem. And so when Tony was trying to do it, he actually made the Red Skull into a robot. No, that's not.
Yeah.
That is a dumber version of Winter Soldier, actually, right?
Yeah.
No, I was like spitballing ideas, and I was like, "Oh, that's dumb."
That's
And
not
also,
a great
it
idea.
also means it's not Ultron; it's just Red Skull Part 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Like robot Red Skull.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think what we're kind of getting at is we want more time with Ultron.
Yes.
because the turn of Ultron, and my hope is somewhere, even though like they were like, oh, we've trapped Ultron from the internet. My hope he's still like on some flash drive.
That's
somewhere.
always how they do it in the
Yeah.
comics. Like every time they think they kill him,
Yeah.
like
He's been downloaded.
Ultron-
somewhere.
I'd like him to come back.
like Ultron's whole shtick was that he was a rapidly iterating robot, and as we started to learn more about computers, then it became more terrifying, and that's when they did the Ultron Unleashed story, which is actually where they draw the most notes from for this movie, where it's like he brings back like duplicates of all of his previous bodies, and he wipes out. I think it is Sokovia, and that's like a terrifying story for them that they have to like face off against this army of like invincible robots. But so that should be kind of the thing. If you need to have a setup to justify us both liking him, being sad that he fell the way he did, and justifiably scared of him. And I think if they have Jarvis being so powerful, and they start to set it up, like everyone uses Jarvis at the beginning of the movie.
Right.
Jarvis should have been the crowning achievement of everything Tony Stark did, and we've had a bunch of movies with him where we liked him a lot.
Yeah.
And then his betrayal, because he was corrupted by the Time Stone, is the best way to set that up. Because you could do it with just Ultron being a separate thing, but you would need a lot of time, and this movie is packed as it is.
Yeah.
So have Jarvis be betray them. They lose all this network connectivity that they had before. They are crippled as a result of this, and then Jarvis like fully transforms into a villain.
Yeah. And then they reset their router and make Vision.
Well, exactly, but
Reverse the polarity.
but what would be interesting, and like part of this is that I think that Tony shouldn't, when they go off into the final battle, shouldn't just be able to load a new personality. I think the Jarvis should be a really complicated thing that initially was all of Stark's computers was the network that Jarvis lives on. And when they finally put Jarvis into the Vision body and they cut off Ultron, it should just be like a very baseline computer. They did a great scene in Nova like that, where he was linked up to the World Mind, and then when the World Mind was shut out of him, he had like a very like simple command prompt system that he could use. And something like that would have been great for Iron Man, where it's still a computer, but his armor is not able to support an artificial intelligence like that by itself. It's always been a giant network of his computers. Like if the Stark,
but the network still exists, right?
But what I'm saying is that there should be a sacrifice, and this should be the nerf point for Iron Man.
Another pass, IT edition.
I mean, I see what you're saying. Like I felt weird about him having a replacement already there. I felt weird about him having Friday like just ready to go. But I'm like, I mean,
what if the way they
basically
they
really what they
lock
were
Iron Man, or pardon me, they lock Ultron out is they destroy the supercomputer or like whatever the central server is.
But they already established that he escaped and was running.
Yeah, but he's
everywhere.
so sophisticated. Like we're not talking about like a JPEG that can just live everywhere. We're talking about a computer that normally can only live in an impossibly complex, quantum-defying stone. Like, if Ultron normally existed in our internet by way of being in all of the super powerful computers, and like the big jump that Iron Man takes, and this could be like the thing, a continuation of his arc of dismantling his company, of him having to shut down this like massively powerful network that he has under his like normal control.
Right.
They lose that. You lose Jarvis as we understood him, and so that he only lives on in the body of the primary Ultron who can still control his drones.
Okay.
And that's why it's Ultron and his drones and not just a bunch of Ultrons.
Ultrons, right.
And then Vision, who is a synthetic version of Jarvis, like a flesh form of it. But that's it. And so we've sacrificed a resource that they had before
Okay.
in order to stop this villain.
Okay.
And that from that point on, the Avengers don't have an AI that can just be like, bullets coming in on your right. And that's when they start being able to get hit a little more easily. And when
It weakens them, yeah.
yeah. And at that point,
And then that puts a stress on them because they don't have that backup.
yeah.
Okay. I could see that. I'd watch that. I mean, I think
Like the big arc is just that Ultron just is like comes into a being and is evil. Like that's the problem with this movie. Like we don't have reason to care about Ultron besides him coming into existence and being evil.
Well, it is
and then
born out of
dangerous.
Tony's fears of a possible future.
Yes.
And I think that's still a key part of that. And again, you could still do that with Jarvis or Jarvis becoming Ultron and being good for a while, and like even gaining people seeing Ultron in the streets and doing good things, so that the people trust him.
Yeah.
And then the turn. So it's not just a turn on the Avengers; it's a turn on the entire world, so that the whole world has a reason to have lost trust in the Avengers.
Yeah. Like he should have continued looking like Stark's drones for a bit, so that people are afraid of Stark's drones.
right.
Like
yeah, I thought it was strange that like when
People were like throwing fruit.
acid and food
Yeah.
at the drones. I thought like I was like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Like, where's
what
this
kind of acidic
hatred?
fruit is that? That was my first thought.
Yeah.
Tomatoes.
I'm like,
Right.
wow, they are really susceptible to.
Or Sokovia has a terrible farming economy.
We should drop their city.
I have another thought on this one, just to tie it back to the comics a little bit more, which is not a major rewrite. It's because this could just be a line where when we find out that Jarvis has been corrupted by the by the Mind Stone, and it is now like going crazy. It's like, where could he possibly get this? Tony reveals, I based Jarvis on my own brainwaves. Even though it sounds like Paul Bettany, because Ultron was based on Hank Pym's brain, and
That's right.
and Vision is based on Wonder Man's brain, and they're never going to do Wonder Man because that is such a long conversation
Yeah.
about a character that is not worth it for this movie series.
Well, they're never doing Hank Pym either. I mean, because
Well, they did not. I mean, he's
well,
in it, but he's
well, they're
not-
never
yeah.
doing Hank Pym truly as Ant-Man,
Right.
you
So
know?
just, and I like Tony Stark being the one who creates Ultron. I
Yeah.
think that's good.
I think that's
it makes
fine.
sense
Yeah.
for
I
the
think-
MCU for the MCU as
I
they
think this movie
established it.
could have been Jarvis takes over one of his suits and runs off. Now a little too crazy. So you see Iron Man actually in the like apparently being evil for a minute there.
Well, okay. So what? How about this? So how about if we got rid? If we replace Quicksilver with Hank Pym, and Hank Pym is the one who corrupts,
Like he comes on board and they're working on the Ultron program.
or he hacks in.
Bring Michael Douglas.
Yeah, and make it act. Not even Michael Douglas. He casted somebody else, so we don't know that Hank Pym is Michael Douglas at this point.
But we, the audience, did for this movie because like the Ant-Man and Ultron came out the same summer, and they could have actually been reversed
Yeah.
in terms of their release order, which is why I'm
came out,
fine
like,
with
2
doing.
months
You could do Scott Lang in that movie, like have. That
Okay,
movie come
so
out
all right,
first,
so
and
Hank
then-
Pym, but still, Hank Pym uses Scott Lang as Ant-Man to go in and hack Vision, or Jarvis, which
Okay.
becomes or hacks Ultron, which is what that way you still have then the tie into Hank Pym creating.
But
Ultron.
I don't think that one's as necessary. Like I that is his historical.
Yeah, but I'd
origin.
rather have him in there than Quicksilver.
Yeah, I don't think we're budging on the Quicksilver thing,
You
buddy.
guys wrong.
I think
Yeah.
we're arguing about two different points though,
Yeah.
because like Quicksilver's role in this movie has nothing to do with the creation of Ultron.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I agree with that.
I think that Ultron being created by Tony Stark works really well in the universe we're building.
Yeah.
It always works really well in the comics, and it's really more just a product that Iron Man wasn't on the Avengers when someone wanted to write the Ultron story.
Okay.
That the Ultron being an extension of like the man in the iron suit story of like
Yeah.
the Iron Man armor becoming sentient and crazy and then going off and building its own body. That's a perfectly fine foundation for Ultron. And the way that they have Ultron develop later as he like builds better bodies, I think he gets too good a body too soon. But I like the idea of him iterating, and I think if we saw a few more of those where it starts off as just an Iron Man drone, and then maybe like a beefed up version of that, and then we get to like the body we see most of the movie, and then the vibranium body, that would have been a great progression for the character. The origin fidelity does not bother me so much because they can do some cool things with it as it is right now, and that's the vision. Like the vision in the movie we get is amazing. I constantly look at whoever at this thing in the movie and think whoever wrote this is a genius, because they perfectly take a very faithful comic adaptation of the Vision and also Adam Warlock and meld them together in a way that if you didn't know about the other character, you would just think it's that character. It is the best I've ever seen where you've done an amalgam like that.
Yeah.
And it's so seamless. Like the fact that there are rumors now that they might actually bring out Adam Warlock, I'm like, no, why? Because we already got we've got the perfect version of that. Yeah. Because the way they build the synthesoid body with that cocoon is the Adam Warlock thing. The fact that it's got the Mind Stone there is the Adam Warlock thing. The fact that he's the perfection, like the perfection of humanity. Like Adam Warlock's a blank slate made form and given the soul gem. Like this is the exact thing, and that we've already created. You take that with the Vision, who's a synthetic human, and all of that, and like. Unless you want to get into like the backstory of him possibly being the original Human Torch, which no one in this series wants to do. No one wants to do, unless they want to like reference how they had the Human Torch in Captain America. And it's like, oh well, we found this like crude body, and now we're gonna lay over some skin or something like that. Like, no, we don't need to do that. We can just have the Vision be an amazing amalgam with Adam Warlock. It's so good, and that's why I'm okay with whatever changes you want to make to origin stories. Like. I don't mind callbacks. I don't mind finding ways to like fit it all together.
Yeah.
But I don't need to like dramatically change something to be weaker because it's more faithful.
I agree.
And I think
completely
Tony Stark
agree with
is
that.
more while less faithful to the comics is a better story. Origin.
Yeah,
to the
I
point
agree.
Where Iron Man constantly talks in the comics about how he feels like he's the real rival of Ultron, even though he never created it and had really nothing to do with him.
Right. I agree.
It's just
I agree.
technology amok.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm arguing.
Quicksilver.
That technology amok thing is a thing missing in this movie. Like the vibranium plot is could have just as easily been magic. That like this could be a plot from any Thor villain or any character.
Yeah, the vibranium plot, wasn't. I don't think was as needed, especially because while they kind of introduce you to Wakanda, you don't really get introduced to Wakanda. You get introduced to Claw, but we didn't really need that.
It was fine as it was. I was happy to see Claw, but I'm happy that they're like,
and we got a Claw origin.
I'm happy that they're going to set up the entirety of the Black Panther franchise before we get there, so we don't waste our time on just an origin story.
Yeah.
So, like, Joss Whedon, after this film was made, like, grumbled quite a bit about the constraints that he was given. With this movie. Like, obviously he had to do like things like the Wakanda story. He had to, shoehorn that in, and he had to shoehorn, a setup for Civil War.
Thor's bath.
He had to shoehorn in a setup for Ragnarok. Like, he had to accomplish a lot of beats in this movie as required by Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. There's not a lot of room to change a lot in this movie and still hit those beats. Yeah. And
it's already a long movie.
It is a long movie.
Well, because like this movie, I don't think should have been the second Avengers movie. I think we're missing a movie somewhere.
Yeah.
Or it could be Avengers 2, but they should have felt comfortable doing a movie like Civil War before Avengers 2, where we get everyone on screen. Because if you look at Phase 2 up until that, or if you look at Phase 2,
still pretty singular.
It's singular movies where we'll have a nod to these characters. But at no point does it feel like these are people living in a world together, aside from maybe Captain America.
Right.
Right, because it is odd, like in Thor Dark World, that nobody shows up.
Yeah, except for Thor. They have a justification.
Yeah, even when they like arrive on Earth, to fight it out.
S.H.I.E.L.D. is collapsing. Nobody shows up for that. Yeah. Like, it seems odd.
There's a justification. Part of it is speed. Part of it is location. But it still feels weird. Mm-hmm. Like Captain America Civil War is amazing in that it allows them to feel like we're in an Avengers movie, but it's really a Captain America movie, and it truly is.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. We've already done another past episode on that one, and that was more pressing because that movie has some more glaring issues.
Yeah.
This one, the big issue is the villain is not consequential enough in the long term. He is dangerous, but as soon as they put him down, the world is fine. and everything is fine. Like Thor goes off and you can still call him back. Hulk's disappeared, but you know that if he shows up again, he's fine.
You don't really feel like the team is really all that torn apart.
As
I
we
do.
clearly
I feel
see
like
in the next movie.
I feel like some people have left, but I don't feel like they really
Well, they can't get Thor back. They
Iron
don't
Man-
know where Thor is.
Well, it doesn't feel like they've lost.
but they
trust
didn't know
in
where
each
Thor was
other.
before. He just shows up again.
Yeah,
Like the end of the first Avengers movie,
he leaves.
they're not a team at the end of that movie.
Right.
They got
Right, they
together and
all
did a really
each
great
swarm
job.
and then they drive
we
off.
missed a movie of them actually being a
a
formal
team.
because
They
start
talk
off and
about
they've got
it.
an Avengers Tower already.
Well, they reference it of like, you know, they've been hunting this scepter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
after
I'm-
Captain America.
I'm
That's the
fine
thing.
with
After
this-
Winter Soldier, that there should have been a time where they got together and we saw that. And
See,
that could have been Iron Man 3 instead. Like the
I think
order's
the
wrong.
question. I think it would have been helpful to have additional Avengers, not maybe a full Avengers team, show up in Winter Soldier, like the way you said Hawkeye at least needs to show up, and maybe doing the same for Iron Man 3. Although, like, there is a rationale for Tony Stark being very arrogant and wanting to handle things on his own. For in that sense, and he did have War Machine, and I do enjoy the chemistry there.
Right, but War Machine is his sidekick.
Yeah.
He's not an Avenger who happens to be showing up.
That's true. I think the problem with saying there's another movie that needs to be there is what's the arc for the team at that point? Are they just going to accomplish something together? And like, what is that like? What? Where do you develop the team? Because this is, you know,
You're right.
I know, like, I'm not like I know it's easy to say like, well, this is in the same way that the second part of a trilogy furthers the development and starts to show the cracks in the team. This accomplishes that. I think it just could accomplish it better by having a little bit of time with Ultron as a good thing for humanity. Whether that's a continuation of that's why I think, you know, like I actually think we don't necessarily need the opening fights. That we could have a press conference announcing the Ultron initiative based on his Iron Legion from the end of Iron Man 3. Have that announced there. You see the Ultron initiative take care of a few things, including what they accomplished by retrieving Loki's staff.
Tie it back with a fall of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Exactly, and then they're celebrating at Avengers Tower, and there you go. You can just go right on track with the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I
as
get
it
that they
is.
wanted to have that shot of them being so unified as a team and so
Right.
effective as a team. But again, this isn't Civil War. Like that would have been a great shot at the beginning of Civil War.
Yeah.
Where like at the end of this movie, they're going to be all at each other's throats and about to kill each other.
Which is one thing that was good about Civil War because the way they worked together as a team, it like honestly, I felt the way they worked together as a team at the beginning of Civil War for me was a little bit more compelling than the scene. Like the scene that is cool at the beginning of Age of Ultron, and I know like the splash page with all of them in the shot. I wasn't as into it, to be perfectly honest. So, like, I like the jokes that happen in between them, but the action was okay.
Yeah, it's a little CGI heavy. There's a weightlessness to some of the stuff that Thor does that I keep going back to.
Yeah,
and it's the
he's
first time
throwing
we-
people around.
Yeah, it's the first time we actually
even
really
Cap
see him.
is dragging a guy in the.
Throws his 800-pound motorcycle.
Well, I love that part. That was
I
actually
do.
a really cool
It
movie.
was fun.
But you know what's funny? I was thinking
They're
about that
lining
watching,
up for us, you know.
That-
the language joke.
Well, that
The language
Yeah.
joke was funny.
Yeah.
that was good. No, the Thor being so strong and like all of that. We actually haven't seen Thor be super strong that often in the Marvel movies. This is the first time where he's just casually like ripping metal apart and just like doing like
Thor-y things.
Well, doing Hulk level things. Up until that point, aside from him fighting the Hulk, we haven't really seen it.
Yeah.
Which was just a weird like, oh, it's very casual. Whereas Captain America, we have consistently set up as being that strong.
Right.
And it's weird that it's like that I get more moments of Captain America being like, look how I can tear metal apart than
Yeah.
Thor.
Well, and there's also the code green that we never really hear them call in Hulk when things get really bad in that fight. Like things are so easy for them in that. And I know that's
Yeah,
the
they could have had
point.
like a prologue with like, the
Yeah.
Iron Legion being really effective and like going out there and doing all this. And that's when they get to the Hydra base, and that's when all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we need Code Green. Okay, let's get the Hulk and all the Avengers.
And
are
the
there.
Avengers call 'em in,
and like
yeah.
we see the Avengers really making their mark on the world because up until that point they were just a bunch of superheroes who showed up for a fight.
Right.
Like the Avengers one, the end, like. That arc is the same as all these big event comics where like it just happens to be a lot of superheroes. Like they're not
Yeah.
a team. They're
Right.
like they know some people in common, like Nick Fury, who can tell them about some stuff together. But aside from having a situation room, they're not a team. They're
Right.
just they're time bomb. No, but they're no, they're just guys who all show up together to fight the same bad guys. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's its own thing. Like that's the thing. This movie doesn't have enough of a status quo at the beginning to really feel like they've shaken it up.
Right.
So while there are stakes, like we keep saying, there are no consequences. We've gotten the gang all together. They're doing the most beautiful shots we could possibly get in HD, and it looks great. And it's all this. Like, but
I kind of want to go and watch it now.
But then the next movies where we get those big shakeups, like the big consequences to the Marvel universe, and that's why I feel like this movie is the Pro Bowl and Captain America: Civil War is the Super Bowl. Like,
Yeah.
this movie they're at Hawaii. It's gorgeous. They're in great uniforms. Everything looks awesome. It looks amazing.
Really?
But
Ben,
who
you don't
cares?
think so?
And
Did you think when they were fighting the Ultron bots, you didn't think it was too easy?
No.
Even really?
No, like they were stressed the entire, like they were at their limit. I felt like that team was at its limit the entire time.
yeah, but Billy and Trini feel really stressed fighting the putties. Like, they're.
Okay, but
Oh, I'm sorry you didn't join us for that one.
no, I didn't. I felt like this team struggled to get this win, and it had a toll on them, and it laid the groundwork. It laid the groundwork for the breakup, and the breakup starts to happen. You lose Thor. In Civil War they go, they're asked like, well, where's your buddy Thor? And everybody goes, I don't know.
Well, but was Thor the glue? Like,
No, Thor wasn't the glue,
That's
but he's
what we
a
don't get in this movie.
but
Like,
it
sure,
lays-
you can say that this sets up Civil War, but we don't have enough moments where we see that the things they lose in this movie
They
would
lose
have that
Thor.
impact.
They lose Iron Man. They lose Hulk.
They don't lose Iron Man.
They do
They
lose
no
Iron
way
Man.
actually lose Iron Man. Like,
He builds them a new facility.
He builds them a new facility and he's like, I'm retired, and then immediately shows up in his armor the next time they do anything.
Well, we
Yeah.
don't know that the next time.
Right,
But
that's
that's
what I'm
again
saying.
a lack of
That's why this
consequence.
movie.
But you
doesn't
guys
have
are taking
consequences.
that like but at
Did
the
you-
end of that,
did you-
at the end of that movie by itself without the knowledge of what happens next, you see him go, all right, well, I'm done.
It
Like,
didn't
here's
really
the
feel
money.
like he was done.
I disagree.
I didn't get the sense that it was.
But you
completely
can't
disagree.
claim that a movie that was only a year out from being released
Yeah.
or didn't have knowledge that that's where it was going.
Yeah.
Like,
Maybe
we're
so,
talking-
but-
the problem of the Marvel movies is that they have a lot of foresight and yet sometimes don't feel like they're actually acting on it.
Yeah, I disagree with you, Ben, because at the very least, the thing is he's still joking with the team. Like they're joking about if Mjolnir is on an elevator. That if he's quitting the team, there needs to be a little bit more gravity in
Okay,
that moment.
I'll give you that.
And it doesn't need to. Yes, he technically quits the team, but Cap and him had a major argument. He also brings the Vision back against Cap's wishes. Like all these things that should be a bigger reason for a split to happen right then and there should have resulted in more consequence for Thor leaving, for Tony leaving, and obviously Hulk's leaving was impactful. I think that one
Hulk's
worked.
is a big one.
That one worked, but I think what I think would have helped though is I think Widow should have gone too, not necessarily with Hulk, but she was talking about leaving the team as well. And I think that would have given even more gravity. And yes, you could still bring her back for Civil War, find a way to bring her back for Civil War in some way.
Deep
But-
cover.
Yeah, but I think there's having Cap be by himself, continuing the fight with this team that they started. I think does lend a little bit more gravity to the consequence of Ultron.
Yeah, he doesn't feel abandoned. Like,
'Cause
if they were
if
going into the
anything-
fight with Ultron and Cap was like, Tony, we're seeing this through, but after this, we're done. And they weren't friends after that movie. Like, they weren't enemies, but they just, like, whatever friendship and camaraderie they had, like, that was over. But, like, the reason Thor left wasn't really because, like, something they did. It's because Thor had a bigger mission to go off on.
Right.
Like,
Right.
Which
if
is
they-
fine.
Like, if their schism was one which felt self-inflicted as opposed to, like, well, I have to go have my own movie. Like, the movie that this doesn't require a huge change. It only requires them to feel more ambiguous about each other going before they get into it, where it's like, well, the fate of the world, so obviously we're going to be together. And then at the end of it being like, I don't know if that made us cool. Like,
Okay.
because at the end of this movie, they are having banter, they are joking around, they are pretty cool. They may not be like we are a team that I'm going to see every day, but they're pen pals, and they still, and that's why it's not strong enough.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we got like Civil War, which was great. Like they did some amazing things with the relationship between the two of them there. So I don't want to discount that, but I think they could have afforded to do a little bit more to push them down that road. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to wrap up, the big ones that we can agree on at least are spend a little more time with Ultron to begin with.
Yeah.
However you do that, have it be truly Jarvis and then have him be corrupted into Ultron, or have Ultron be a thing they already have at the beginning. Whatever. We need more time with Ultron. He can't just show up as a villain. And then at the end of it all, they should feel a little bit more bitter towards each other. Like it should feel like Cap's barely holding the Avengers together, and he and Iron Man, while not at odds with each other, aren't going to be happy to see each other the next time there's a meeting about like coffee grounds in the sink. And those are the big ones to change, because it's a solid movie. It's well structured, good jokes. It's a good movie. It could be great, but it's not. It's just really good.
Okay.
All right, guys.
I gotta disagree, but okay, go ahead. I can't.
So passive aggressive right now.
I don't because I don't see none of the changes that you guys have suggested have made this movie that much stronger for me. To be honest with you,
You yourself admitted that the turn was too quick for Ultron.
Yeah, but I don't see how you do that without making it a half hour longer and making the movie, frankly, just too long to watch.
It'd be then 2.5 hours rather than 2 hours.
Yeah, then you need to put an intermission in it. Like
You don't need 2.5 hours happens.
dude,
all the
I could
time.
barely sit through that movie without having to go to the bathroom. Yeah, like
Lightweight.
It's a summer action flick. Like,
Hey, listeners.
Lord of the
if you're
Rings,
with-
I sat through for 2.5
Well,
hours.
no, but that
And-
was a winter action flick. They're allowed.
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah.
I
winter is
don't
different
drink
too.
a jug of Slurpee before
Listeners,
that.
if you're with Ben and you think that the tweaks that we've made are not sufficient to really change it or really jazz you guys up, but that the movie is still really good, right? Is that
Yeah, the
fair?
movie's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're ambiguously in the "it's good" category already and doesn't need more work without it being broken, let us know. I'm curious
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anyone who would say that their favorite Marvel movie is Avengers 2: Age of Ultron, which is why I think that it could use some tweaking.
And I love Iron Man 3, but I would tweak a few things here and there.
Yeah,
I would make this movie Iron Man
there's
3.
not a
I
movie.
keep the Mandarin.
I haven't
here.
seen a movie where I wouldn't where you couldn't tweak something. I can't think of anything
Empire
without.
Strikes Back, sir.
You could tweak some things in that movie, frankly.
He's already challenged me on that one.
You're no longer part of this podcast.
All right, guys.
I don't know who you are anymore, man.
Dan,
Dead to me.
Addy, thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing.
That's how it should have ended.
Thank you for sharing your certain point of view about
I
this
know.
movie. But it's been great. I think we've done about as much as we can before we just like
Kill each
cycle
other.
back.
Yeah, we're just gonna start repeating.
Next time we're going to be talking about Highlander 2: The Quickening. And until then, stay scruffy, my nerf herders.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. Okay, so now that we don't have to like be quiet about just like how much of a blitz of an episode this is in terms of just like we're like Ben, Addy, and I when we get into a tear can go like a mile a minute, just like racing with ideas, and we're having a lot of fun. This is what one of these episodes is like, and yeah, that there's a lot of that going on here. But I want to start off the conversation by saying I am extremely proud of some of the analysis that I gave about this movie. There's
I
not
was actually
not my notes
wondering.
about the not the fixes, but just my
Uh,
analysis of the movie itself.
oh, I was actually wondering if you still like now knowing, right, the full run of at least this first part of the Marvel universe. Um, do you still agree with some of your analysis? And not even just your analysis, but like your fixes.
So my fixes are rough to talk about because again, this is so early in the whole prospect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Weird to say considering how many movies deep into this one is it is. Like this is like 10 movies in. But looking at where we would eventually go, it's interesting because I do mention like, oh, it'd be interesting if they had killed Black Widow because she seems like a character that they could get away with killing. And then that happens to be what they would go about doing. In terms of like who could have seen, I don't because like this is before we had the Thor Ragnarok trailer. So we had no idea what was going to
Yeah.
be like that Thor yet. Like that so we didn't see that potential for the character yet. So the best we had seen are the two Thor movies and then his two appearances in Avengers. Um there's a lot of the shifts that we would see for some of the characters, we had no idea. Like we had no idea Hulk was going to show up on like, you know, Sakaar and that would be where they would have like the whole Planet Hulk fight sequence and so forth. Like,
Right.
like who would have seen that specific thread coming from Hulk running off on a plane? Like I get it's a Quinjet. I get that it's a super advanced jet, but it's still meant for flying around planet Earth.
True. Absolutely.
So yeah, so fixes are a hard one, and like I think that this movie is a really hard one to have real conversations about fixes because the movie has so much going on behind the scenes that locks it into being the movie that it was. So there is
Yeah.
a piece of me looking at this where it's like this was a Sisyphusian task because what any thread you pull on, like there's the Joss Whedon of it all, which by the way, we didn't know about at the time when we're talking about this movie. We thought he was going to be the savior of Justice League at this point.
Yeah. Ugh.
um, but
Hindsight,
yeah,
man.
yeah. Now I stand by. I think this is a well directed movie. So like I don't want to get into
Yeah.
any of that. Yes.
Actually, I agree with you on that too. I do think that there are elements of this movie that is fun and it's still fun, but yeah, there are a lot of things that you could just that would make it fall apart under heavy scrutiny.
Right. Well, and then you get into like the behind the scenes meddling from like from the studios, the stuff with like the Thor scenes that they had to cut. Like there's all this stuff in the movie that they're trying to cram in there. Like so, for example, I have my like the ultimate trimmed down list of movies to watch if you're trying to watch up to Endgame and you're like how do I watch the least number of movies and still understand effectively everything? This movie does not make the cut. My like super trimmed down list is Avengers 1, Guardians of the Galaxy, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and then Endgame. And that is, I think, the tightest viewing of movies you can get to understand pretty much everyone. There's going to be a couple characters that you just have to accept that they show up, but because you understand that you're missing a bunch of movies. But accepting that they show up is a different thing from not understanding who they are. Uh, Civil War does a very good job of explaining who Vision is, who Scarlet Witch is, like who these characters are enough. And Avengers 1 is a fantastic movie for that because effectively it's the sequel to all of the phase 1 movies. And so it's assuming that you are coming in having seen one of the tracks that has led to this point. Now, presumably you've seen Iron Man, but if you're coming in as a Thor fan or a Captain America fan, it sets up everything in the universe as if this is like, okay, we don't necessarily know, but here's the nutshell thing you need to know about Thor. Here's the nutshell thing you need to know about Captain America. Then Guardians of the Galaxy does a really good job of explaining the Infinity Stones and does a really good job of explaining the space stuff that is out there. Civil War then does the like, okay, the Avengers are split up. This is why, and here's how the team has changed over time. Okay, cool. And then you got then Infinity War, which ties in the space stuff with all the the team is split up stuff, and then you've got that, and then the Infinity War leads directly into Endgame, and that all makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So this movie doesn't make that cut. And there's a couple reasons why, because it could, like, it does try to explain the Infinity Stones to a certain degree. I think that the Thor scenes that were cut probably would have contributed more to that, like the whole like going into the well and blah blah blah. Um, but you know, it's a weird movie that's doing fine. Like it ultimately is just here's another random threat that kind of people have been asking for sometimes where it's like, I'd rather just have another comic book story instead of it always being necessarily, blue light in the sky. The thing is, Ultron takes it almost to that degree where it's like, I'm going to crush the earth and make it dead by dropping a city. Uh,
I mean, like you always do. I mean, that's just our Saturday night, right? Drop
yeah.
a city.
So arguably he's another like world-ending threat, but he's not quite the same scale world-ending threat as like the Chitauri invading our world from another universe kind of thing.
Right,
Uh,
right, 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 right. He's not Thanos, but he's
right.
also like, but he's also like just wanting to end the Earth. You know what it is? It's still localized. You know,
Yeah.
it's just this planet,
Yeah, exactly.
not
This
all
planet.
planets.
So so
Earth, but
yeah.
that's where I keep all my stuff.
So yeah, like fixes, it's hard to say. Like I don't know if I really like at the end of the episode, I'm hearing it and being like, I kind of agree with Ben that all those things that we said might be addressing nitpicks or maybe even fixing serious issues, but they don't fix the movie as a whole. Whereas I do think I want like I draw a lot of attention to Cap's Kooky Quartet in the episode, and I love discussing the that particular jump in the Avengers roster is a really big pivotal change, and the fact that they addressed that in this movie, I thought was really cool. The Quicksilver stuff, I think my analysis of it, I'm actually like very proud of being like, oh, you see how he's winded here? Like that's important. And like I never see anyone talk about it because they just talk about like, how did you get shot at the end of the movie? He was so tough, yada yada yada. And I'm like, no, but you don't see he. It's because being a hero is harder than being a villain, and so there's that. The obviously we're speculating on the Captain America being able to move the hammer a little bit stuff, because this is before Endgame, so we didn't know how they were going to pay it off necessarily.
Right.
And then things like the analysis of the Vision Warlock kind of fused origin for it. And I go
Mhm.
on and I'm like, I rip on Warlock, who ultimately does show up in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And I rather like the version of Adam Warlock that shows up there. But he's not really like a super faithful depiction of Adam Warlock from the comics. And weirdly, Vision actually kind of remains slightly more accurate to that. I mean, he's not
Yeah.
inaccurate. It's just it's just that somehow they did this like weird alchemy with the Vision and Adam Warlock, who are characters who I never had really thought about being that similar, and somehow made them into a fused character that worked really well.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is like I hate giving compliments to, but I do think that this is one of those things that Joss Whedon was very good at in terms of like because he was very familiar with comics. He was very good at kind of like picking up on traits of characters that people really like. So like him writing a good fusion of two characters that would be similar. That's not surprising. Like that is kind of in his wheelhouse, um, in his bag of tricks. So it makes sense. Um, I do feel that I think you're right. This movie has so many loose ends and it's kind of awkward kind of in a way. It's kind of and again, this comes again with some meddling and I think just like the fighting that happens with these big budget movies where like the studio wants one thing and the director wants another and there's certainly things that Joss did as a whole that like I was not super failing in terms of like Natasha being the only person who could calm Hulk down, things like that. Like I was not super whatever about in his run of like running it. I actually always thought it should be Thor. Like I always thought that like Thor should be the person rubbing his hand, be like, "Come now." I think that would have been so great to me. Um,
I mean, we
but then
see
it would have
something like that in the third movie, and it's really funny when it happens.
yes, yes, but it would have ruined. That's my friend from work for me. So like
Right.
at least I got that. But I did think like, oh, that you know, whatever. But I think in general, this movie is kind of clunky and it's really awkward. And there's a lot of things that it's trying to do. It doesn't necessarily achieve it. And honestly, I was trying to think of like how I would fix it. But it's such a juggernaut of not knowing the exact way. Because like the stakes are that he's going to lift this city
Right.
for impact. And it's like, okay, like is that a good plan, my friend? Like my guy? Like is that like a you know? And so I think like
I mean,
in
I'll
general,
give
there's
this. It is an Ultron plan. Like, specifically, Ultron has
fair
plans
enough.
like that all the time. Um, and by that, I mean, like, my introduction to Ultron was reading an Avengers West Coast annual where he tried to, like, set off multiple volcanoes across the world so that there would be an ash winter that would kill off all of humanity. So, like, that's his kind of plot. Like, he's
Yeah, that's
often
fair.
very into the idea of killing all of humanity because he really doesn't like us, and then doing and having some sort of big natural disaster, whatever the buzz natural disaster of the time could be, to be like, oh, I can set off the tectonic plates of California. It's going to wipe out all these people, or whatever thing he wants to do. Um, Now he has kind of pivoted in more recent years because has become like upgraded. He like fused with the Phalanx during Annihilation Conquest and became a galactic threat. So we've seen upgraded versions of Ultron beyond that point, but at least the Ultron of this movie is very much like the classic Ultron of like the 70s Avengers run that led up to this point in the comics, or like this point in what, 2015 when this movie came out. So yeah, I will say the plot fits an Ultron kind of plot. I think I think this movie is less than the sum of its parts.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I
I keep thinking about scenes and shots that I really like in this movie, like the splash page shot of like all of the Avengers on frame after that big oneer at the opening of the movie. Like that's a really good shot. Or like in the final battle when they're all doing this like we're seeing all these like beautiful shots of the team working together, being Avengers together against all these Ultron drones. Like, oh,
people oohed and awed in the theater during that scene. Like
yeah.
people were genuinely awestruck during that scene and there was cheering. It is like it's like, oh my God.
Right, and like the way that they use some of the characters, like the freakiness of the Scarlet Witch at the opening of the movie, where she like kind of looks like the girl from The Ring as she like moves around in this like weird kind of like preternatural form. Like that's awesome. Again, the Quicksilver stuff, the Vision stuff, like the party. People talk about how the party is one of the great scenes in Marvel in the MCU because it's one of the few times where we get the Avengers just relaxing and hanging out. And we get a great Stan Lee cameo where he gets to make fun of Thor.
Yeah, I love that. And like honestly, you're right. There are so many fun moments in this film that if you just like want a summer blockbuster, turn your brain off, kind of like feel you can go in and enjoy this if you're not thinking too hard about how it all adds up.
Yeah, and then it's followed up by Civil War, which is just doing a lot of similar things and is, I think, a I think has less. Well, it has great scenes. I think that it is a movie where it comes together more into a bigger whole, as opposed to this movie where again there's all these great scenes, but when I look at the movie as a whole, it's like, it's kind of mid.
I also think that one of my big criticisms is that I just think that this movie lets the Tony and Steve Rogers beef like come up too high. Like the tension is too much. so that by the time we get to Civil War, I was like not even sure that they were more than just work colleagues. Like, you know what I mean? I felt like Civil War had to do a lot of heavy lifting of like, we were friends, we were pals, because I feel like this
Yeah.
movie, and I felt this way, like, even when I saw it, I just felt that some of the arguments that were written in this film felt very forced and contrived, like the tension between them. And I also felt that it was like, then once we got Civil War, I was like, I felt like those were too early. Like that precursor was too early. I needed more because in order for War to work the way that eventually I think they wanted it to work, I needed to see more camaraderie between Cap and, which is why the party scene is so important because like that there actually, I just feel like there needed to be more working together and less like tension between the two of them so that in Civil War that would have worked better. And there was so much kind of angst between them. And that I honestly, I would really, if there's one thing that I would change about this movie, it would be the dynamic of that relationship because um I think it would have made a better movie. I think it would have because this is still a movie, like the Avengers have formed, but like they're coworkers that saved New York. Like, you know what I mean? Like this movie would have brought them together. This is the movie where there should have been more around the campfire things. Like in Lord of the Rings, there should have been more confiding in each other and being friends and building that up. And like that way, the possible losses, or even someone getting hurt. Like we didn't even have to kill anyone specifically. Like I know Quicksilver, blah blah blah. Sony, Fox, blah blah blah, all that shit with all the Marvel stuff. But like literally, we could have injured one of the top ones and still had him saved and been close to death. We even could have had one of those fake outs where we thought they were going to die. Um, I don't know. Like to me, there was just not enough emotional connection, and especially from those two major characters, which is Tony and Steve, who are the center really of this universe and the Avenger films. Not necessarily like all the build out films, but like one, Avenger 1, 2, and like Civil War. Like I feel like those specifically feel like it's around their story. And I just feel like we're missing the Empire Strikes Back. Like this should have been the Empire Strikes Back. This should have been the middle of the story. And it wasn't. It was more the prelude to the end of their relationship. And so like I think for me, that is the one major nitpicky thing that I would have fixed. And I don't know if it would have made like a much better movie, but I think it would have been slightly better than what we got.
Yeah, because I also felt that we were just treading the same beats of like the Cap and Iron Man, like having frictions, kind of plot thread here, and then doing the same thing in Civil War. And I agree with you. It didn't. It felt like we had this very forced arc in this movie, and then we went through the same arc in the next movie. And the next movie is the one where they had to do it. So it's like this movie
Right.
felt like, well, why do we even bother with that? Like there's a lot of spots in this movie where characters do things and they even call it out. It's like, are we really doing this again? Like when it comes time to create vision, you know, like that's a
Yeah.
mea culpa that isn't necessarily saying like that doesn't necessarily make it better to say like, hey, I know what we're doing is wrong. Like it's calling attention to the fact that you know it's wrong.
Yeah. Calling yourself out doesn't necessarily make it better.
So, like, some of the drama between Steve and Tony, like, I don't think it was necessary. I think that they could have been a more like having them get split off for reasons makes enough sense. Like having Cap have his kooky quartet sequences, like we need to have those. Like that, those are important and they're really good in this movie. So I don't want to lose those. But it does feel like the we just didn't need them butting heads because that's the next goddamn movie.
Yeah. Like there just needs to be like I feel that there may have been a misguided, like, oh, this is the setup for the next movie. But no, like, you literally did too much in this film. Like, it needed to be, like, I'm not saying that they had to be like kumbaya the whole movie.
Right, there
But
could be
I needed to
seeds.
there could be seed, but this movie felt like nothing but like headbutting. It felt like sometimes it felt like they were like in a pissing contest rather on the same team. And which is why like in Civil War at the beginning when they're like, what's happening? Why are you like you've been fighting for like at least one other movie. What are you talking about? What's happening? So it definitely like it bothered me when I was watching it originally, but then it really bothered me after I saw Civil War because I was just like, I always feel like you need the space. And I think sometimes like with the Marvel films, and I think that this has become like an ever increasing issue with them, is that there's like not enough space in them sometimes for the characters to breathe, and they don't know when those moments should be because they're so focused on like the huge ensemble of it all. Um, and that is a challenge when you have so many characters. Um, when you're trying to set up so many set pieces to kind of keep people interested and excited. Um, which is like part of the game, right? Like we want to see those big group battle scenes for sure. But I do think that this movie in particular is the beginning of them of just like the Marvel habit of like not necessarily always knowing when to let the characters like breathe.
Yeah. I
Um
maybe not the beginning, but it's certainly I if the Avengers movies are sort of um, the ultimate thesis of each phase that they are a part of,
Mhm.
you know, or like where the first one's the big victory lap of the sort of weird slapdash project that was phase 1. And then this is the culmination of phase 2, which is a much more uneven phase in my opinion, but it's generally looked upon fondly because it has 2 of the best of the Marvel movies of all time. Because it has Captain America: Winter Soldier and it has Guardian of the Galaxy 1. And as a result, like people are like, It's a great phase," even though like Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World are generally not looked upon as fondly in the Marvel pantheon, and then this one is not looked upon as fondly as an Avengers movie in the Marvel pantheon as well. So yeah, so I'm I think that I also I don't want to be like too dismissive of all the points that we make in it. I do think that we address some of the issues of this movie, such as the weird like just rapidly creating an Ultron kind of sequence that occurs in this movie. Um, we do address that, and we address ways to make it a little bit more logical that they get down to a singular like Ultron to fight in it all. So we are tackling problems that this movie has. This movie just has a lot of problems.
yeah. It can still be fun because again, there are a lot of really fun, great shots. And so if you haven't seen it, like
Oh, it's totally
if you're
worth
folding
watching.
your laundry, yeah, it's worth
Yeah,
watching.
super worth
You
watching.
know?
I don't want to be that negative. I'm super positive in the episode, and like I remain positive about this movie. Like I think there's a lot to really like about the movie, but I think that is a lot of it is the trees and not the forest.
Yeah.
Like again, that this movie is better as pieces than rather as the sum.
Yeah. Definitely go into it thinking it is a popcorn film. Popcorn summer film, not a deep thesis on anything.
So I guess now that we've discussed the episode a bit, what do you think we missed out on? Like, do you have a pitch that you would give, or what are your thoughts on
I'm
them?
I mean, honestly, everything you said, except, with my caveat or with what I just said, with making sure that Tony and Steve's relationship um, has more tender moments in this film. I want to see their friendship, and I want to even if they have a disagreement at one point, I want to see them trust each other later. I want like a good old fashioned, like even if it's like a nod or something, or like see you on the other side, like that kind of thing. Like my buddy, my pal. Um, I want to feel like they're buddy cops even if they're not together, like they're partners, they're gonna go on their own mission. But like I want the dynamic of like Steve feeling like he's too old for this shit and RDJ just jumping off a bridge. And like I want to lethal weapon them. Other than that, like everything that you guys said, like such good points. I mean, like even with your point about Jarvis and also just, just everything that was said, there are no points that you guys missed.
We were thorough.
You were very thorough. Um, but that's the only thing I would really add because that was like something that really bugged me. Even while I was watching it, and then like even like because a lot of the arguments felt to me so contrived. They felt ham-fisted, like shoved in there to like make that happen. Um, so, but I don't know. I think that's it because you guys really covered everything.
Yeah, this was like again, this was an animated episode. Uh, so yeah, I guess I hope listeners got a lot out of listening to this episode of Age of Ultron.
If
I
anything, they definitely got to know what it's like to hang out with you.
Yes. Um, I actually really hope that this is a chance for people to check this episode out if they weren't listening to the show back in the day and this was one that was missed. Because I actually think this is a really good conversation about the movie, even if I think that um, adjustments that we were making, was from the window when we were doing it made sense, but from the perspective of like now with like all, in game and everything already long since passed, uh,
Right.
Christ, at this point now, what, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Uh, because Jesus, time keeps moving. Uh, yeah, so I hope that listeners really enjoyed this episode, and I hope that this is a chance for people to check out an episode that is earlier in our run that I was pretty proud of, and I realize that these are bonus episodes, so sometimes people skip them. I realize that like on our YouTube, for example, like these have way less views than our regular episodes because they're on their own separate playlist. But I do think this is a really good one that's worth checking out, and so I obviously, if you're listening to this point, you've checked it out. So thank you. Yeah. So aside from that, let's get into the general housekeeping that we do on these bonus episodes. So when this episode is dropping a little bit late in our production schedule because we've had issues recording just you and I, like we've been able to get like with
Mhm.
guests, but like when it's been just like, oh, we'll just do the apps, it's been kind of hard. So when this is dropping, we just dropped 2 back-to-back Star Trek episodes of Another Pass. So we did Star Trek Generations with Hope Wyatt from Mind Brain Movies, and we did Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier with William J., who is from Farragut Forward. And on that note, the next episode of Another Pass that is coming out is episode 170. So that's a 5th episode. So we're looking at Farragut Forward because it is an independent fan film and it is hard to make those. And you know what? I know everyone involved in that. I am currently editing the table read for our Indiegogo investors, and like it's just yep, I've got everyone in the production just like on a screen in front of me, and I'm just like cutting our clips together. Like I know everyone. So we've got the director, we've got the executive producers, and we've got the writer coming on
And
to chat
and
about
it's
it.
also a fifth episode 'cause it deserves to be because it is a good film. And if you haven't watched it, you should. It's on YouTube. Very easy to find.
Yeah, yeah, definitely check out Farragut Ford. Plugs for that. But, but that's the next episode of Another Pass that is coming out. Now, in terms of the next bonus episode, that is going to be. Ooh, this is going to be on X-Men 3. This is actually a really fun one, also. So I'm
Ooh.
excited for that one. This is when I'm like really feeling myself in terms of like the movies that we're doing.
I feel like that's gonna be another case episode. I feel
Oh,
I
it's
feel
a
it in
Case
my
and Jeff
bones.
episode.
Very special for me. I
Yeah.
cannot wait.
It's gonna be if you're familiar with what a Jeff episode is like and you're familiar with how much a Case episode can go, the X-Men 3 episode is going to be that and more. It's gonna be a fun one.
Oh, listeners, I'm excited. I hope you're excited too.
But otherwise, Sam, what have you got going on outside of here?
Nothing. I only live here in my my floating piece of land that I hope the evil robot that's keeping it up won't drop onto Earth, ending all of civilization. But in the meantime, if I remember in between my screams of terror that our Discord still exists, I will check it out. Please pray for me. Please pray for me. Okay. But if you can't reach me because I have died, um, you can find Case at.
Well, in addition to the Discord server, that is such a terrible handoff. I'm sorry.
Leave it in. It's
Yeah, no, it's
hilarious.
staying in. You can find me on the Discord server as well. You can also find me on Blue Sky. I'm kind of trying to push my social media peeps to that specifically. So you can find me there at caseaiken.bsky, whatever dot social or whatever the whole part of it is. But if you just search for Case Aiken, you'll find me. And that's where you can find threads that I'm doing on comics and D&D stuff, and where I'll share links to the respective new episodes that are coming out for this and for Men of Steel, because I host two podcasts. This and then Men of Steel, which is a Superman and Superman adjacent show where my co-host J. Mike Folson and I talk about the Man of Steel and how cool it would be to be Superman and like all the fun permutations on that fantasy. So check those out. Check out our YouTube channel where we post full episodes of this, as well as in videos like my Superman analog series, my D&D class analysis series that's been going strong, all kinds of stuff on our YouTube channel. That's really fun to check out. It is great. And yeah, then you should circle back and check us out for our next time. Like I said, we've got Farragut Forward coming up as the next main episode, and then X-Men 3 coming up as the next bonus episode. But otherwise, until then, pass it on.
All right, Josue, let's go through our new comic day stack. We have a lot to review.
I know. Maybe we've gone too far.
Well, let's see. Marvel, of course, DC,
I got Image, Dark Horse,
Black Mask, Boom, IDW,
Aftershock, Vault, of course, Mad Cave,
Oni, Valiant, Scout.
Magma, Behemoth.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, all we need now is a name for our show. We need a name for our show about reviewing comic books every week. Something clever, but not too clever.
Like a pun? It's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it's something that seems funny at first, but we might regret later on as an impulsive decision a few dozen episodes in.
Yeah, we'll think of something.
Join Keith and Josue for We Have Issues, a weekly show reviewing almost every new comic released each week. Available on Geek Elite Media and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I really almost did say Scruffy. I really almost said stay Scruffy whenever.
I actually almost said Scruffy Nerfers.
Oh, that's going to be my blooper.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.